MCU TV is back. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be giving you my spoiler review / breakdown of Moon Knight Episode 1, the first episode of the Moon Knight series that is now streaming on Disney+. And before I get into this, there will be tons of spoilers for this episode. It's a breakdown of the episode, so if you have not seen it, make sure to leave a like, go watch the episode, then come back and drop your thoughts in the comments down below. Again, comment down below your spoiler-filled thoughts on this episode, and make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, as I'm going to be covering Moon Knight for its entire run. Right off the bat, this is the most jarring episode of an MCU show, I would say, because we see this random dude sitting down. He has his hands out, you notice a little scale tattoo on his wrists. He takes a sip out of his glass and then he smashes it and pours this glass into his sandals and walks off into the distance, revealing this Egyptian looking pyramid structure that he is in. And this is also Ethan Hawke's character, whose name we later find out to be Arthur. But out of the gate, this is the most obscure opening that I can think of for a Marvel show. It creates a lot of intrigue out of the gate, and this is only the beginning of the mystery that is set up in this episode. After the classic MCU logo plays over the screen, we see wake up in his bed, and he's strapped in, and it's very strange. It's very off-putting because he has this support on his leg, and then he's got tape on his door. There's these little ticks, these little things that he has to do. You can definitely tell he has a order to his life, but then it feels very out of sorts as he goes to the museum that he works at. He's a gift shop worker, and when he arrives there, he has this conversation with this little girl, obviously showing off his knowledge of the Egyptian gods and just Egyptian culture. He talks about how they would mummify people, and he goes on to have a conversation with a boss talking about the marketing team for this Egyptian god group, how there's actually 9 instead of 7. So he's definitely well versed in this Egyptian culture, and that's obviously something that's going to come into play throughout the rest of the show. And it's worth noting that his name is Stephen Grant. He's got a British accent, and there's no indication that he is Mark Spector, but just based on his interactions between people at the museum and other people in his life, you can kind of tell something's up, and I really like this decision from the show. Like I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, it puts us in the shoes of this main character because he's very disoriented and has no clue what's really going on, and that's how we feel, and I think that it works at times, but as the show progresses, I think it also can be to a fault, which I'll talk about in my other spoiler reviews as we get further into the show. One interaction that stands out in particular to me is when he talks to this girl at the museum, and she says, "We're still on for dinner at 7 on Friday, right?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, of course." But they're going to the best steak place in town, and he's a vegan, so he doesn't even remember making this date happen, and he's kind of like, "No, wait, are you asking me out?" And it's a very weird exchange, but it also kind of, again, puts us in his shoes in the fact that he's disoriented and he was probably a different personality when this happened. So Stephen goes back to his apartment for the night, and we see him there, and as he is sitting in his apartment, he's trying to stay awake, doing puzzles, reading books, something to keep his mind buzzed. In a very abrupt edit, it cuts to him falling from the sky. He's in a different location, a different outfit, and these two dudes with machine guns are firing at him, and he's chased into a city, and it's just very out of the blue, and it was like, okay. On first watch, I was shook because I was like, this is all happening so fast. Like, what is going on? Who is this? Did he switch personalities? And then we see him down in the city, and we get our first actual introduction to Arthur, who is the villain of the show, played by Ethan Hawke, and he's testing all these different people. All these civilians seem to kind of be attracted to Ethan Hawke's character as if he is a godlike figure. He even references heaven, and he's testing different people with the scale tattoo he has on his arm to basically justify how their lives played out. One person is successful, one person ends up dying, so it's a very strange. But then the dudes with machine guns come into the city, and it turns out they're working for none other than Arthur, and a mercenary has been taking out some of their guys. And who could this mercenary be? Well, it's Stephen Grant. But from our point of view and from Stephen's point of view, he has no recollection of doing any of this. He doesn't know how he even got here. And right before they go to like physically accost him and take him hostage, essentially, they're trying to get the scarab from him, which is an ancient necklace looking object that Stephen is in possession of. And right when it gets taken from him, he does this thing where he blinks quickly and he blacks out for a second, and it cuts to him and he's holding the scarab with blood in his hands, and there's blood on everyone around him, so he killed them all. But we don't actually see this violence go down. So we see the aftermath, and there is a little bit of blood, but it's nothing too brutal or crazy. He's then on the run, and it cuts to him in this cupcake van, and he's driving. We get a cool little action scene where he's in a little bit of like a car chase through the streets. And again, all of this is extremely just wacky. It almost feels like when you're dreaming and it's just cutting from random place to random place. That's kind of how it felt watching this episode. He then wakes up in his bed, and it seems as if everything was a dream to him, and he just goes on with his day. But then he realizes little things have kind of changed since the last time he was awake. For example, his fish Gus has 2 fins instead of 1, so he goes to a pet store raising hell about it. He shows up to work, and he realizes that he actually missed his date because apparently it's Sunday and all the clocks are different. So he still goes to the restaurant with a date he had planned and calls her up, and she's like, That was on Friday, it's Sunday, so he lost 2 days of his life and he doesn't know how. And honestly, throughout this entire first episode, I was getting Memento vibes, where the main character in that movie would just be confused throughout and you kind of had to put the pieces of the puzzle together. That's very much what I'm getting with this show so far. There's also a fair share of humor, as there are moments where he'll be talking to this dude who's posing in all gold like a mime. I thought that was a pretty funny exchange. And Stephen Grant as a character, he's very quippy and has a lot of charm to him in my eyes. So after he orders a steak and eats it, he goes back to his apartment and he's freaking out. He's like tripping on the elevator. He's seeing the lights flickering, and then he sees this Egyptian god-looking figure approaching him, and he freaks out in the elevator. Then he sees that it's just an old lady, and he was kind of just tripping out. But when he actually gets back to his apartment, he's looking around to see if anything has changed, and he realizes that there was a cell phone hidden in like one of the boards of the wall, and there's a bunch of missed calls from someone named Layla, and she actually calls him while he's on the phone, and he answers it, and he speaks with this lady. We're not sure who she is, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you're alive." And then she's like, "Why are you talking in a British accent?" And he's like, "This is just how I talk, who are you?" And she hangs up the phone. So again, we're finding out these little pieces about his character, and perhaps pieces of the puzzle to another life that he might be living. He hears voices in his apartment, and we get one of my favorite visual shots in the first episode. He goes into the bathroom and the lights are off, and he sees the mirrors like shaking its head at him, and he turns the light on and it's just him. I thought it was a really clever way of making him feel like he's slowly going crazy with these different personalities. So at this point, Stephen Grant is just freaking out, and as an audience, we're very unaware of what's going on. We feel very jarred just like he does. And then he kind of does the blackout thing again, and he wakes up on a bus on his way to the museum. And as he's looking out the window, he sees the images of that god figure that he saw in the elevator as well. So clearly he is unwell, but he still runs on his merry way to work, and he's talking to the security guard. They have some funny exchanges throughout the episode. A little bit of comedic relief for the show that's a little bit more serious for the MCU. And he's basically saying like, "I'm being followed, you gotta protect me." And the security guard kind of brushes him off. He says bruv, which I always think is funny when English people say bruv. It reminds me of the Kingsman movies. But anyway, someone he saw on the bus was also Arthur, our villain of the show. And sure enough, Arthur arrives at the museum not long after. And then it's revealed that all these museum workers are also kind of in cahoots with Arthur, and they believe in this Egyptian god Amet, and they have this like scale tattoo on their arm, which is kind of their call. So I like how this is establishing the lore of this group that believes in this Egyptian god. Their leader is essentially Arthur, who's trying to get the scarab back, which Stephen is really kind of unsure of how he even came into possession of to begin with. We then cut to later that night. Stephen is still at the museum, and he really starts tripping at this point because he sees this weird creature that looks like some Egyptian creature, different from the one we saw in the elevator earlier, which was supposed to be Khonshu. And this creature is chasing him down. He's freaking out. He ends up running into the bathroom where there's a bunch of mirrors, and this is the first time we see this other personality really talk, and it's revealed to be Mark Spector. He's talking to Steven through the mirror saying, "Steven, you have to give me control or we're gonna die. You have to give me control so I can stop this thing." They have a really cool exchange. This is definitely my favorite scene from the first episode, just from the visuals, the way they use mirrors, and it's just a very trippy looking scene. And the coolest moment by far is when Steven sure enough switches into Mark, and he becomes Moon Knight, suiting up for the first time. We then see him absolutely destroy this Egyptian creature, beating him brutally, taking out the sink, leaving a ton of carnage behind, and then he gets up, walks into the camera as Moon Knight, and it cuts to black. The episode definitely ends on a high note with us seeing our first full look at Moon Knight and seeing him kick some ass at the same time, but it is a lot to process, especially after just one watch. It did do a good job of creating a ton of intrigue and mystery moving forward for further episodes, and without a doubt, it hooks you in some way. So I think as a first premiere episode, it's definitely good, but I think a lot of people might be upset by the lack of Moon Knight in suit in this first episode because it's not till the very end that we finally get that. But I think that it does a good job of establishing Stephen Grant. We don't know much about Mark right now because it's all been Stephen based, but there's a lot to soak your teeth into in this episode. Again, what the hell's going on with the villain putting glass in his sandals? Where is he going when he's blacking out? Is he becoming Mark? That's kind of what is implied, but at the same time, it would also be cool to see what actually happens when he blacks out from the perspective of Mark. Now, I have seen the first 4 episodes. My non-spoiler thoughts on that I will link up above, but I will say the Moon Knight premiere is a pretty solid episode of TV. It's not spectacular, not pushing any boundaries. I think it's definitely dark in subject matter, but there's not a lot of blood, even violence, or even that gruesome of a nature to the show so far. But what do you guys think? I want to know. Let me know your spoiler-filled thoughts on episode 1 in the comments down below. Make sure to hit that like button, and again, subscribe and hit that notification bell as I'm going to be having spoiler reviews for Moon Knight every single week from here on out. Thank you guys again for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.